Some things aren't for sale. I said it before I understood that the man standing across from me was the one person in Manhattan who could have bought almost anything. The library was nearly empty that night. Outside, rain tapped against the tall windows, soft and steady, turning the streetlights into blurred gold. I was 27 years old, working the evening shift at the Harrison Public Library, and my biggest concern was whether I had enough money left for groceries after paying my rent. I had been cataloging old records for almost 3 hours when the elevator doors opened. I looked up. 3 men stepped into the reading room. 2 wore dark suits and stood silently near the entrance. The third walked between them. He didn't look rushed. He didn't need to. The room seemed to notice him before I did. He was tall, maybe 6 feet 2, dressed in a charcoal suit that looked perfectly fitted without appearing flashy. His dark hair was neatly combed back, and his expression was calm in a way that made me instinctively lower my voice. He stopped at my desk. Olivia Bennett. My fingers paused over the keyboard. Yes. He placed a photograph on the counter. It showed an old leather-bound file. I need this record. I looked at the reference number. My stomach tightened. The file was almost 30 years old, part of a restricted collection donated by a local estate. I'm sorry. Those records aren't available without authorization. One of the men behind him shifted slightly. The stranger didn't. Authorization can be arranged. His voice was quiet, not threatening. Somehow that made it more serious. I shook my head. Not by me. He studied my face for a moment. Then he asked, "How much would make you change your mind?" I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I looked down at my faded sweater, the chipped mug beside my computer, and the stack of unpaid bills hidden beneath the desk. $500 would cover my groceries for weeks. 1,000 would give me breathing room. 10,000 could change my life. But something about the way he asked made me straighten my back. No amount. His eyes narrowed slightly. Everyone has a price. Maybe everyone you've met. I slid the photograph back toward him. I'm not selling public records. For the first time, something changed in his expression. Not anger. Interest. He picked up the photograph and turned it over in his hand. Do you know whose name is inside that file? No, he looked at me again. Your father's. The rain suddenly seemed louder. My father's name had not been spoken by a stranger in years. I stared at him. How do you know my father? The man didn't answer immediately. He glanced toward the closed reading room behind me, then back at my face. Because 30 years ago, Daniel Bennett saved my life. I stopped breathing for a second. My father had always refused to talk about the years before I was born. And now, standing beneath the cold library lights, was a stranger claiming that my father had once been part of his world. Who are you? I whispered. He held my gaze. Adrian Blackwell. I had heard the name. Everyone in the city had. I just hadn't known the quiet man in front of me was him. And I certainly hadn't known that the file he wanted contained a secret my father had taken to his grave. The name hung between us like a question neither of us wanted to answer. Adrian Blackwell. I had heard it in quiet conversations, always followed by lowered voices and unfinished sentences. But standing there in the library, he did not look like the man people whispered about. He looked tired. Not physically tired. Something deeper. I folded my arms across my chest. If my father saved your life, why have I never heard your name? Adrian glanced toward the rain-streaked windows. Because your father wanted it that way. That is not an answer. It is the only one I can give you tonight. I stared at him. Then why come here? His eyes returned to mine. Because I have been looking for that file for 18 years. My breath caught. 18 years. I was 9 when my father died. For most of my childhood, I had believed he was simply a quiet man who worked too much and carried too many memories. He never talked about old friends. He never mentioned Adrian Blackwell. He never explained why certain people seemed to know him when we went into the city. I had once asked him about it. He had only smiled and told me that some chapters were better left closed. What is in the file? I asked. Adrian walked closer to the desk, but stopped a respectful distance away. A record of something that happened before you were born. That sounds vague. It is. And you expect me to hand it over because you say my father knew you? No, his answer came immediately. I expect you to make your own decision. That surprised me. I studied him carefully. Then why offer me money? A faint expression crossed his face. Regret, perhaps. Because I made the mistake of thinking money was the language everyone understood. I almost smiled. It is useful. Useful is not the same as important. For some reason, that sentence stayed with me. I turned toward the restricted archive room. The key hung from a ring beside my computer. I had used it hundreds of times, but suddenly it felt heavier than it should. I cannot show you the file without checking the records. Adrian nodded. Then check them. You are not going to pressure me? You already told me no. He said it as though my refusal had actually been enough. That unsettled me more than an argument would have. I unlocked the archive room. The fluorescent lights flickered once before settling into a pale glow. The smell of old paper and dust filled the narrow space. I moved along the shelves until I found the collection number from the photograph. My fingers traced the faded label. Bennett, Daniel. Private correspondence. My heart began beating faster. I pulled the box free and carried it to the desk. Adrian did not move toward me. He waited. I opened the lid. Inside were envelopes, photographs, newspaper clippings, and one sealed letter with my father's handwriting across the front. My name was written on it. Olivia. I stopped completely. Adrian saw my expression, but said nothing. I picked up the letter with trembling fingers. He knew I would find this. I whispered. Adrian's voice was almost gentle. Your father knew you would need to. I looked at him. Need to know what? For the first time that night, Adrian looked uncertain. Why I came back. I turned the envelope over. It had never been opened. My father's handwriting was unmistakable. And beneath my name, there was one sentence that made my hands go cold. Trust the man who brings this to you. For a few seconds, I could not move. I simply stared at my father's handwriting, trying to understand how a letter sealed for almost 18 years had somehow been waiting for me on the same night Adrian Blackwell walked into my life. Trust the man who brings this to you. My fingers tightened around the envelope. How did you know this was here? I asked. Adrian remained on the other side of the desk. I did not. Then how did you know to come tonight? He looked at the letter. Your father told me that if I ever needed the truth, I would find it in this archive. I frowned. That still does not explain why my name is on the envelope. Adrian was silent for a moment. Because Daniel knew me better than anyone. I looked back at the letter. There was something strangely personal about the way my father had written my name. Not hurried, not frightened, deliberate, like he had expected me to hold it one day. I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. My father's words filled the page in neat blue ink. Olivia, if you are reading this, then Adrian has finally returned. Do not judge him by what people say about him. Judge him by what he chooses when he has something to lose. I read the sentence twice. Then a third time. What does that mean? I asked. Adrian did not answer. I looked up. What did you have to lose? His jaw tightened slightly. Your father. The room became very quiet. You were friends? I asked. We were more complicated than that. Were you partners? In a way. Business. Sometimes. Then what was he involved in? Adrian looked toward the shelves of old records. Something he wanted to leave behind. I felt a chill despite the warm library. You are still not telling me anything. Because I promised him I would not tell you until you were old enough to choose what to do with the truth. I stared at him. I am 27. I know. So what changed? His eyes met mine. You found the letter. I lowered my gaze to the page. My father had always been careful with his words. Even when I was a child, he spoke as though every sentence had a hidden door behind it. I remembered one night when I was 8. He had been sitting at the kitchen table, staring at an old photograph. When I asked who the people were, he had folded the picture and put it away. Some people belong to another chapter, he had told me. Do not open it unless you are ready for what comes after. I had forgotten that until now. Adrian noticed my expression. You remember something. Maybe. I told him about the photograph. His face changed when I mentioned it. Was there a man beside him? I do not remember. A woman? No, he nodded slowly. Then there is one more thing you need to see. He reached into his coat and placed a small photograph on the desk. It showed my father standing outside a building I recognized immediately. The old library. But he was not alone. Beside him stood a much younger Adrian, perhaps 18 or 19, smiling in a way I could hardly imagine on the man in front of me. Between them was a woman I had never seen before. She was holding a baby. I looked closer. My breath caught. Who is that child? Adrian's voice dropped almost to a whisper. You. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. I stared at the photograph as if looking long enough could change what I was seeing. The little girl in the picture had round cheeks, dark curls, and the same tiny crescent-shaped birthmark beneath her left ear that I had carried my entire life. That is me, I whispered. Adrian nodded. Yes. I looked at my father again, then at the young man standing beside him. You knew me before I knew you existed. I did. Why? Adrian lowered his eyes to the photograph. Because your father asked me to watch over you from a distance. My chest tightened. Watch over me. Not control you. Not interfere. Just make sure you were safe. I pushed the photograph toward him. Then why did you disappear? His answer came quietly. Because your father believed that my world had no place in yours. I wanted to argue, but the words would not come. The library seemed suddenly too small for everything I had just learned. My father had spent my childhood protecting a secret I had never known existed. And Adrian had apparently been part of that secret from the beginning. Who was the woman? I asked. Adrian looked at the photograph. Her name was Claire. He nodded. She was your mother's closest friend. I stared at him. My mother? My mother had died when I was 4. I remembered almost nothing about her except the scent of lavender and the sound of her humming while she washed dishes. My father had rarely spoken about her after she passed. What does she have to do with all this? Adrian took a slow breath. Claire was the person who introduced your father and me. Why would she do that? Because your father needed help. I felt my pulse quicken. With what? Adrian looked at the clock on the wall. Nearly 8:30. Rain continued tapping against the windows. That is what the rest of the file explains. I looked down at the box. There were dozens of documents still inside. Letters, receipts, photographs, newspaper clippings. A life my father had hidden behind ordinary days and quiet dinners. Then we read it, I said. Adrian looked surprised. Tonight. You came here tonight for the truth. So did I. He gave a small nod. I began sorting through the documents. The first few were harmless. Old property records, business correspondence, a photograph of my father standing beside a storefront I did not recognize. Then I found an envelope marked with a date from 28 years earlier. The handwriting was my father's. Inside was a letter addressed to Adrian. I read the first line silently. Adrian leaned closer, but he did not try to take it from me. What does it say? He asked. I swallowed. It says you were supposed to leave New York. His expression went still. I continued reading. My father had written that Adrian was becoming too visible, that people were watching him, and that staying close to our family would put all of us under unnecessary attention. Then came one final sentence. I read it aloud. If you truly care about Olivia, disappear before she remembers your name. Adrian closed his eyes for a moment. Your father was right. I looked at him. Then why did you come back? He opened his eyes. This time there was no distance in them. Because 18 years ago, I made him a promise. And I think I finally understand what he was asking me to do. I waited. Adrian placed his hand gently on the edge of the photograph. He was not asking me to protect you from my world. His voice softened. He was asking me to make sure you never had to become part of it. The library clock had just passed 9 when Adrian said the words that changed the meaning of everything I thought I knew about my father. He was not protecting me from Adrian. He was protecting me from becoming like him. I looked at the open file between us. You keep saying my father wanted me away from your world, I said. But you still came back. Adrian nodded. Because the reason he asked me to disappear is the same reason he knew I would eventually return. That makes no sense. It will. He reached into his coat and placed another envelope on the desk. This one was smaller. My name was not written on it. Instead, my father's handwriting said only, for Adrian, when Olivia is ready. Adrian stared at it for several seconds before touching it. I have waited 18 years to open that. I looked at him. Then open it. He did not move. You should be the one to decide. I frowned. Why? Because whatever is inside belongs to you too. I reached for the envelope and handed it to him. Then we opened it together. Something softened in his expression. He carefully unfolded the letter. My father's first sentence was simple. Adrian, if Olivia is reading this beside you, then you kept your promise. I felt my throat tighten. The letter explained that my father had once worked for a small family business connected to Adrian's father. It had started as ordinary work, managing accounts and records. Over time, my father discovered that people around the business were using its name for things he wanted no part of. Instead of leaving quietly, he began collecting evidence. Not to gain money. Not for revenge. He wanted to protect the people who had trusted him. Adrian had been young then, barely 18, and had seen enough to understand that his family was changing into something he did not recognize. My father had become the one person Adrian could speak to honestly. Then came the sentence that made me look up. Your father believed Adrian could choose a different life. Adrian stopped reading. You knew, I said. You knew my father believed that about you. He told me once. And did you? Adrian looked toward the dark windows. Try. He nodded. For a while. His voice was quieter now. Then I made choices I regretted. I waited, but he did not explain. Somehow, I did not need the details. The important part was that he had not come into my life expecting forgiveness. He had come carrying an old promise. I turned another page. Near the bottom, my father had written something directly to me. Olivia, you may be tempted to believe that Adrian owes you answers. He does not. He owes you honesty. There is a difference. I read that line twice. Then I looked at Adrian. My father trusted you. He did. And now he wants me to decide whether I trust you. Adrian gave a faint smile. No. He wants you to decide without being afraid. The words settled heavily in my mind. For years, I had thought courage meant standing up to people stronger than me. Maybe it meant something quieter. Choosing for myself when someone else could easily choose for me. I closed the file. I want to see everything. Adrian nodded. Then we will. I gathered the documents into a neat stack. For the first time that night, I noticed something strange. Adrian had not once asked me to follow him. He had not told me what to do. He had simply waited. And somehow, that made me more curious about him than any command ever could. I looked at the final envelope in the box. It was sealed with a faded blue ribbon. My father's handwriting covered the front. Olivia, this is the part Adrian never knew. I slowly reached for it. Adrian's expression changed. What does it say? I looked at him. I whispered. We are about to find out why my father never told either of us the whole truth. The blue ribbon felt strangely familiar beneath my fingertips. I had seen that color before, years ago, on the little box where my father kept the few things he never wanted me to touch. I looked at Adrian. He was watching the envelope, not me. You really do not know what is inside? I asked. No, you never saw it. Your father sealed it after our last conversation. I carefully untied the ribbon. The paper made a soft sound in the quiet archive room. Inside was a single photograph and a letter folded twice. The photograph came first. It showed my father standing in front of the old Harrison library, much younger than I remembered him, with my mother beside him. Between them was Adrian. But there was something different about this picture. My mother was holding my infant self, and my father was looking directly at Adrian. On the back, my father had written a date. October 14th, 1998. I stared at it. I was born in 1999. Adrian nodded. 6 months before your birth. I turned the photograph over again. The letter was addressed to me. Olivia, there are truths that should be told immediately, and there are truths that must wait until the person hearing them has enough freedom to choose what they mean. I kept this from you because I wanted your childhood to belong to you. My eyes blurred for a moment. I continued reading. Your mother knew Adrian before I did. She believed there was still a good man beneath the expectations placed on him. She asked me to help him leave that life. I looked up. My mother knew him. Adrian's expression softened. She was the first person who believed I could become someone different. That sentence landed harder than I expected. I had spent years remembering my mother as a warm voice and a gentle smile. I had never imagined her as someone who could challenge a man like Adrian Blackwell. What happened? I asked. Adrian looked down at the photograph. She became ill. Your father focused on caring for her. I stepped away because I believed my presence would only make things harder. And my father? He never blamed me. I read further. My father explained that before my mother died, she had asked him to make Adrian promise something. Not to protect me with money. Not to control my future. Not even to stay close. She wanted him to promise that if I ever discovered the truth, he would give me a choice. My hand trembled slightly. I looked at Adrian. That is why you waited. Yes. For 18 years. Yes. Even when you could have found me. I knew where you were. I felt a strange pressure in my chest. You knew about my life? Only what was necessary. My college. I knew you graduated. My first job. I knew you worked at the library. I stared at him. You knew all this. And you never contacted me? Your father asked me not to. And you listened. I gave him my word. Silence settled between us. For the first time, I understood that Adrian's restraint was not an accident. It was a decision he had made repeatedly for almost 2 decades. Then I noticed another line near the bottom of the letter. There is one final thing you should know. Adrian did not return because of the file. He returned because someone else has been looking for it. My eyes moved across the page again. I felt the warmth leave my face. Someone else knows about this? Adrian's expression became serious. That is what I have been trying to confirm. Who? I do not know yet. Then why bring me into this? He looked at me for a long moment. Because you were already in it. You simply did not know. I closed my eyes briefly. The life I had understood that morning seemed impossibly simple now. My father, my mother, the library, my quiet apartment, my ordinary routine. All of it had been built around a story I had never been allowed to read. I folded the letter carefully. What happens now? Adrian answered without hesitation. Now, you decide whether you want the rest of the truth. I looked at the sealed documents, then at the man my father had trusted enough to wait 18 years. I do. Adrian nodded. But before he could say anything else, the library lights flickered. My phone vibrated on the desk. I looked at the screen. There was a message from an unknown number. I opened it. It contained only 6 words. You should stop asking about your father. My hands went cold around the phone. You should stop asking about your father. 6 words. No name. No explanation. Just enough to make the quiet library feel different. I looked at Adrian. Did you send this? He shook his head. Immediately. No, can you tell who did? Not from the number alone. He reached for his phone, but I pulled mine closer. Do not. His eyes met mine. Olivia. No, my voice surprised me. It sounded steadier than I felt. I do not want you making decisions for me. He stopped. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he nodded. All right. I looked at the message again. My first instinct was to delete it. My second was to ignore it. But something inside me resisted both. If I had spent my entire life being protected from the truth, I was done letting other people decide how much of it I could handle. I placed the phone beside the open file. What do we know? Adrian leaned against the edge of the desk. We know your father kept records for years. We know your mother knew me. We know she wanted me to stay away from you unless you were ready. And now someone else knows the records exist. That sounds like a lot. It is. What are you not telling me? He paused. There is one possibility I have not wanted to put in your head without evidence. Tell me anyway. Adrian looked at the clock. It was nearly 10. The rain had softened outside, leaving the windows covered in tiny trails of water. Your father may have kept more than one copy of the documents. I frowned. Why? Because he did not trust one location. Where is the other copy? I do not know. Then how can we find it? Adrian looked at the photograph of my father. Your father left clues. I opened the file again. Where? That is what I have been trying to remember. You mean you do not know? I was 19. He gave a quiet exhale. At that age, I thought I understood everything. Something about the honesty in his voice made me look at him differently. This was not the untouchable man I had imagined. He had once been young, uncertain, and apparently dependent on my father's guidance. I pulled out the old newspaper clippings and spread them across the desk. Dates, names, addresses, business announcements. Nothing obvious. Then I noticed a repeated phrase in the margins. 4th floor, room 412. It appeared 3 times. What is this? I asked. Adrian came closer. I do not know. You said. My father left clues. I said he might have. I turned the papers toward him. Then help me find them. He studied the numbers. Room 412 was in the old Jefferson building. The building still exists. Yes. What is there now? Private offices. I looked at the clock again. Can we go there? Adrian hesitated. Tonight. Why not? Because it is almost 10. You said someone else is looking for this information. He nodded. Then waiting until tomorrow does not make sense. A faint smile appeared on his face. You really are Daniel's daughter. Is that a compliment? It is an observation. I gathered the documents into the box. Adrian did not touch them until I nodded. Then he carefully closed the lid. We walked through the darkened library together. Every footstep echoed across the empty floor. At the front doors, Adrian stopped. Before we leave, there is something you should understand. I turned. What? If we find what your father left behind, you may discover things about him that are difficult to accept. I thought about the letter, about my mother's trust, about the years of silence. He was my father, I said. I loved him without knowing everything. I can still love him after knowing more. Adrian looked at me for a long moment. That is exactly what he hoped you would learn. We stepped outside. The air smelled like wet pavement and rain. A black sedan waited at the curb, but Adrian did not open the rear door for me. He simply stood beside the car and waited. Your choice, he said. I looked at the city beyond him. Then I opened the passenger door myself. I am coming. Adrian gave a small nod and walked around to the driver's side. As the car pulled away from the library, I looked back through the window. The building disappeared behind us. I thought about my father's letter, the unknown message, and the mysterious room 412. Then my phone vibrated again. Another message from the same unknown number appeared on the screen. This time there were only 4 words. Adrian is not what you think. Do you trust him? I asked myself as the city lights slid across the windshield. The question stayed with me all the way to the Jefferson building. Adrian drove in silence, one hand resting on the steering wheel, the other near the center console. He did not ask about the message. He did not try to convince me. Somehow, that silence made me more nervous than an argument would have. I looked at my phone again. Adrian is not what you think. I wanted to believe it was meaningless. Maybe someone was trying to frighten me. Maybe someone simply wanted me to turn around. But my father's letters had taught me one thing already. Nothing in this story was accidental. Why did you never tell me about my mother? I asked. Adrian kept his eyes on the road. Because she asked me not to. She asked you not to tell me? She asked your father to protect your childhood. I agreed to respect that. I looked out the window. You seem to have a lot of respect for promises. Your father taught me that a promise means more when nobody is watching. I did not answer. The Jefferson building appeared at the end of the block, an old stone structure surrounded by newer glass towers. Most of the offices were dark. Adrian parked near the entrance, and we walked inside. The lobby smelled faintly of old wood and floor polish. A security guard looked up from his desk. His expression changed when he recognized Adrian. Evening, Mr. Blackwell. Adrian nodded. We need the 4th floor. The guard glanced at the clock. The elevators are locked after 9. Adrian reached for his wallet, but I stopped him. Do not. He looked at me. What? Do not solve everything with money. A small smile touched his face. I was going to show him my identification. I felt embarrassed. Right. The guard checked Adrian's identification and then made a call. A few minutes later, he gave us temporary access. We stepped into the elevator. The doors closed with a soft chime. 4th floor. Room 412. The numbers climbed slowly. I could hear my own breathing. When the doors opened, we found a narrow hallway lined with closed office doors. Room 412 was at the very end. There was no sign on it. Adrian tried the handle. Locked. I looked at the old documents in my hand. One of the newspaper clippings showed the same building decades earlier. I turned it over. There, almost invisible beneath the yellowed paper, was a sequence of numbers. For -1-2-9-9. Try that, I said. Adrian entered the numbers into the keypad beside the door. A soft click sounded. The door opened. I expected a storage room. Instead, there was a small office preserved almost exactly as it must have looked years ago. A wooden desk, 2 filing cabinets, a faded green lamp. On the wall was a photograph of my father, my mother, and Adrian. I walked toward it slowly. Beneath the photograph was a handwritten note. 3 words. Start with home. Home. I whispered. Adrian stepped beside me. Your father used to say that whenever he did not know where to begin. I looked around the room. What was home to him? Adrian thought for a moment. Your childhood house. My heart skipped. The house had been sold after my father died. I had not been back in years. What are we looking for? Adrian asked. I do not know. I began opening drawers. Receipts. Old stationery. A broken watch. Nothing. Then I saw a small wooden box inside the desk. My father's initials were carved into the lid. I opened it. Inside was a key and a photograph of my mother holding me as a baby. Behind the photograph was another note. Olivia, if you have reached this room, then Adrian kept his promise. But the key is not for this building. I turned the key over in my palm. A tiny number was engraved on it. 214. Adrian stared at it. That is your old apartment number. I looked at him. My childhood home. He nodded. Apartment 214. I suddenly remembered something. My father had kept a locked drawer in our old kitchen. After he died, I had searched it and found nothing except a small brass key that I thought was useless. I had thrown it away years ago. I think I know where we need to go. Adrian studied my face. Your old home. Yes. He nodded. Then we go there. I slipped the key into my pocket. As we walked back toward the elevator, my phone vibrated again. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the message. This time there was a photograph attached. It was a picture of our old apartment building, taken that night. Someone had been watching the building. Underneath the photograph were 7 words. Your father hid the truth where you grew up. The old apartment building looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was the years. Maybe it was the fact that I was no longer 9 years old, standing beside my father and believing the world was simple. Adrian parked across the street, and for a moment neither of us moved. The message on my phone still glowed in my hand. Your father hid the truth where you grew up. Are you sure? Adrian asked. I looked at the building. No. Then I opened the door. The lobby smelled exactly the same. Old carpet, dust, faint coffee from the superintendent's office. My childhood seemed to rush toward me in pieces. The blue mailbox my father had repaired twice. The narrow hallway where my mother used to hold my hand. The elevator with the scratched brass buttons. We rode to the second floor in silence. Apartment 214 was no longer ours. A young couple lived there now, and I had no intention of involving them in whatever secret my father had left behind. But I remembered something. The basement. When I was little, my father had kept a small storage locker there. He called it his workshop, although I never remembered seeing him build anything. Adrian followed me downstairs. The basement lights hummed overhead. Rows of storage doors stretched along the concrete corridor. I stopped in front of locker 214. This was it. Adrian looked at the number. The key. I pulled it from my pocket. The lock turned easily. Inside was a small wooden trunk covered in dust. My father's initials were carved into the lid. DB. I knelt and opened it. There were no business records. No money. No mysterious objects. Just pieces of my childhood. My mother's scarf. My father's old watch. A birthday card I had made when I was 7. A faded photograph of the 3 of us at Coney Island. I picked it up, and my eyes filled with tears. Why would he hide these? I whispered. Adrian crouched beside me. Maybe he did not hide them. Then why put them here? Maybe he was keeping them safe. Beneath the photograph was a small envelope. My name was written across it. Olivia, when you miss us, remember that love is not the same thing as memory. I pressed the letter against my chest. For years, I had believed my father's secrets had taken something from me. Now I wondered if he had been trying to leave something behind. Adrian looked at the trunk. There is something underneath. He lifted the wooden base carefully. A thin compartment appeared beneath it. Inside was a small flash drive and another letter. This one was addressed to Adrian. He opened it slowly. I watched his eyes move across the page. Then he stopped. What? I asked. He handed me the letter. Adrian, if you are reading this, then Olivia has chosen to trust you. Do not mistake that trust for permission to control her life. She must remain free to walk away from you at any time. I looked at Adrian. He did not defend himself. He simply nodded. Your father knew me well. I continued reading. There is one person who knows where the remaining records are. Her name is Claire Bennett. My heart stopped. Claire. Adrian looked at me. Your mother? No, he shook his head. Her closest friend. I remembered the photograph from the library. The woman holding me as a baby. She is alive? Adrian's expression changed. I do not know. I turned the letter over. Nothing else. Then I noticed the flash drive. Can we open it? Adrian nodded. We returned to the library shortly after midnight. The building was dark except for the desk lamp I had left on. I connected the drive to my computer. One folder appeared. It was labeled Olivia. Inside were dozens of scanned documents and one audio file. My father's voice came through the speakers. Older, tired, familiar. If you are hearing this, then I am gone, and Adrian has finally brought you here. I covered my mouth. Olivia, I need you to understand something. The truth was never meant to make you afraid. It was meant to give you a choice. Adrian stood quietly behind me. My father's voice continued. The person who knows the rest of the story is Claire. Find her before the records disappear. The audio ended. I stared at the screen. Adrian looked at me. Now you know why I came back. I nodded slowly. No, I said. Now I know why my father trusted you. Adrian said nothing. For the first time that night, I realized the choice in front of me was no longer about whether I trusted Adrian. It was about whether I was willing to finish the story my parents had started. I closed the laptop. We find Claire. Adrian nodded. Together? I asked. He paused. Then he answered exactly the way I needed him to. Only if that is what you choose. And for the first time since he had entered my life, I smiled. Then I choose it.